And we are back for the Thousand Worlds Book Club, and we're talking about Call Him Moses. Call Him Moses is a relatively short story. It's only about 20 pages. The link is below. I'm sorry there's no audio. For this installment, we are joined by Coldhands. Hello! Call Him Moses is the 6th story in the Tuf Voyaging series, but it's actually the second one that George R.R. Martin wrote. Our author originally wrote it in 1978, but I'm certain he updated it for the 1985 Tuf Voyaging. Unlike with A Beast for Norn, we only have the 1985 version. So sadly, no fun comparisons. Now, Call Him Moses is a story in the same vein as Bitterblooms or In the House of the Worm. We have science posing as magic and legend, except rather than it being the setting, it's the full plot. The story fully embraces Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Now, even setting aside the post-apocalyptic sci-fi Westeros idea, science poses as magic all the time in the world of Ice and Fire. Most notably, Aeron Damphair resurrects people with CPR, Melisandre makes her fires dance with the use of explosive powders, and Euron navigates far from shore, likely with the help of a sextant. Of course, I believe the extreme of this, that there is no magic in the world of Ice and Fire, only technology, telepathy, and telekinesis. How do you explain my resurrection? Are you resurrected, or is someone telekinetically and telepathically animating your corpse? I'll never tell. Now our story begins with Tuf and Dax enjoying a meal when a man named Jaime Crean attacks him. Dax alerts Tuf to the danger, and Tuf dodges the bottle. And then in a very surprising action, Tuf breaks Jaime Crean's arms. I guess Tuf is not a pacifist. Now I should say our author seems to like the name Jaime. We of course have Jaime Lannister, but people from Jameson's world are called Jamies, and here we meet Jaime Crean, Jaime, the same spelling as Lannister, which is the Spanish-Portuguese spelling of the name. I have no idea if there is a special Jaime or Jameson in our author's life. So after the fight, Crean goes to prison and is released into forced servitude under Tuf. The local laws are a bit weird. And so the two head to the Ark, where they pass by Tuf's ship collection. We interestingly hear about a teardrop-shaped Avalonian ship that looks much like Morgan's ship from Bitterblooms. Morgan was from Avalon, so this makes sense. This Avalonian ship is of course Tuf's old vessel, the cornucopia of excellent goods at low prices. So Tuf informs Crean that he owes him 400 standards. And Tuf starts buying answers from Crean about why he attacked him, a standard per answer, which Dax helps him bargain for. Crean tells Tuf that he attacked him because he feels that Tuf is a criminal. Interestingly, Tuf brings up that law is relative. This, of course, is one of Socrates' arguments at the beginning of the Republic. What is legal is clearly not synonymous with what is ethically just, and we will get back to this idea in a second. So Crean tells Tuf that his life has been ruined by a man named Moses who has taken over his planet, and that Tuf is assisting him. Crean in the passive voice says, "It is well known," which is similar to our hilarious Dothraki phrase, "it is known." Moses was able to take over the planet by threatening everyone with advanced technological abilities that Crean assumes Tuf gave him. And so Tuf and Crean head to Crean's home planet of Charity. Along the way, Crean does labor for Tuf. However, his labor does little to get rid of his debt. Tuf charges him for everything, and Crean is additionally tempted by good food and gambling. It's slavery! What do you mean by that, Coldhands? Moses wanted to free his people from slavery. Ironically, Tuf has enslaved Crean. But Crean is in service to Tuf because of the law. And what is legal is not necessarily what is just. But doesn't Crean choose to go into debt? That's not slavery. Tricking and manipulating is just as unjust as forcing. Well, I think that's up for debate, but I think you're right that our author is comparing debt to slavery. This is an interesting idea as Braavos, a supposedly anti-slavery society, uses debt as its lifeblood. They simply traded one form of slavery for another. If George R.R. Martin is truly equating debt and slavery, then he's kind of saying that Western society hasn't advanced as much as it thinks. Yes, we have gotten rid of slavery and feudalism, the horrors of Westeros and Essos, but perhaps we still have some immoral mechanisms to force people into work. Tuf's behavior towards Crean does seem unjust and unfair. He charges him for basic life support, medical services, and he tempts him with various vices. However, is this at all different from modern society? Are people in Western society still enslaved? Karl Marx would certainly argue that we are. He believed that society progressed from a slave society to feudalism to capitalism, but that the basic structure of the few having power over the many was still in place. And it should be noted that Tuf actually calls his arrangement with Jamie Crean slavery. Now you may ask, do you think George R.R. Martin is a communist? And I would say, yeah, he seems to have some sympathies that way. The power of debt that Littlefinger and the Bank of Bravos have over people is clearly a criticism of capitalism, and clearly classism is a major problem in the world of Ice and Fire. And after reading In the House of the Worm, it seems that George R.R. Martin is a big fan of Sartre, who was a communist. And it's difficult not to think of all of the hive-minded characters in the story as communists in a way. At minimum, our author is at least thinking about these issues. Anyway, after making it to Charity, Tuf finds that Moses has forced the citizenry to do away with much of their technology. This shows that Moses is a bit of a hypocrite as he used high technology to enslave them. Tuf finds out that Moses had hit Charity with 6 plagues, a river turning to blood, frogs, lice, flies, locusts, and darkness caused by power outages. Tuf agrees to help the people of Charity out of the goodness of his heart, and for money. And so Tuf comes to Moses as a holographic pillar of fire. Pillars of fire are a manifestation of God in the Old Testament. Tuf accuses Moses of being a fraud and says that his powers are only that of technology, conspiracy, and planning. Tuf claims that Moses had agents sneak into the main city, wait a few years, and then cause supposed magical plagues. The agents released various animal species, put organic chemicals in the water supply, and caused power outages. A conspiracy? How is that possible? Well, in real life, conspiracies are very difficult. The more people in the conspiracy, the more likely someone is to blow the cover. But our author loves to write about elaborate conspiracies. He has a story called The Way of Cross and Dragon, which involves a massive galactic conspiracy. The conspiracy essentially creates fake religions. And he has a time-traveling revenge story called Unsound Variations, where a conspiracy ruins the lives of 3 men. And Lady Dustin and Marwyn definitely think there's a conspiracy of maesters. It should be noted that maesters use ravens, and a group of ravens is called a conspiracy. Of course, Moses' takeover of Charity is very reminiscent of the Sparrows taking over King's Landing, and I do wonder how much conspiracy was involved in putting the High Sparrow in place. Now, Tuf points out that Moses is clearly a fraud because he omitted certain plagues. Moses skipped over pestilence and boils, and his plagues were isolated and limited. Tuf calls out Moses for being a charlatan. Using the same logic as Tuf, Melisandre is clearly a charlatan. Melisandre takes credit for kings dying and animals spontaneously combusting. But if she could really do that, wouldn't she be doing that all of the time? Anyway, Moses essentially tells Tuf to fuck off, and Tuf then says he will unleash plagues on Moses. And so Moses finds the river in his village turn to blood. We find out that Tuf did this with microorganisms. And then a violent frog species emerges from the river. Moses' men do battle with it, but they fall back. Moses then frees the people of Charity. So the people of Charity are happy, but they're still worried that Moses will enslave them again once Tuf leaves. And so Tuf brings Moses aboard the ark to show him various simulations of things he can do. He shows him animals and plagues, and even shows him a living darkness that is reminiscent of the shadow that Davos sees come out of Melisandre's vagina. You don't believe in shadow babies? Who killed Renly? Well, Renly is killed by something invisible, not a shadow. George R.R. Martin's favorite movie is a movie called Forbidden Planet. It's about a man who subconsciously creates a telepathic, telekinetic monster that kills people when he's sleeping. Stannis couldn't be woken up when Renly was getting killed, and Stannis has memories of killing Renly. I think Stannis killed Renly telepathically, not a shadow baby, and Courtney Penrose was likely just killed by his men. Then what came out of Melisandre's vagina? Well, it might be a glamour, or maybe it's a smoke organism like here in this story. In the show, Melisandre mentions that she has a potion that creates a smoke that gives men fear. Anyway, Moses is thoroughly scared by the simulation, and likely will cause no more trouble. Crean afterwards points out that Tuf was bluffing about one of his simulations. Tuf boasted in a simulation that he could create hail, but Crean points out that his talents are in genetics. Tuf concedes that Crean is correct, and Crean then asks for his last paycheck. Tuf, though, charges him for getting off of the ship. Crean finds himself free of Tuf, but 100% broke. Tuf is quite a dickhead. Yeah, it is hard to reconcile the character of Tuf in these past 2 stories with the Tuf that we saw in the first 3 stories. His exploitation of Jamie Crean does seem excessive. Perhaps Tuf is becoming corrupt. That was Tally Moon's prediction, but Tuf wasn't nearly as bad as he was in A Beast for Norn. If one wanted to show Tuf in a downward spiral, Why not swap the order of this story and A Beast for Norn? I chalk up Tuf's weirdness to the fact that this story was written rather early. This is another story that doesn't put religion in a good light. Yeah, 4 of our last 10 stories have bashed religion. Moses and the holy altruists are presented as a bunch of charlatans. What's interesting is they actually perceive themselves as liberating slaves. They want to free people from the vices of modernity, something that we saw Jamie Crean fall right into with Tuf. A paradox. We're enslaved with technology and we're enslaved without. Well, I guess there is some level of subjectivity to slavery. I'm sure both the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War viewed the other's populace as enslaved. Anyway, that's all for Call Him Moses. I'd like to thank Coldhands for joining me. Anytime. Next time we'll be bringing Tuf Voyaging to an end with Manna from Heavan. The link is below. We'll see you then.